World War II became the first global conflict where the sky turned into a decisive battlefield. Before 1939, aircraft were mostly seen as tools for reconnaissance, helping generals observe enemy positions. The common belief was that wars were won by infantry and artillery. But the rapid development of aviation technology completely changed this vision. By the early years of the war, aircraft had transformed into powerful weapons capable of deciding the fate of entire nations. The German Blitzkrieg showed the world a new, terrifying form of warfare. Dive bombers screamed from the clouds, destroying bridges, columns, and cities within minutes. Fighters fought brutal duels above burning towns, and bombers crossed entire continents to strike industrial centers. For the first time in history, civilians far from the front lines felt the direct impact of war coming from the sky. The airplane was no longer just a machine. It became a symbol of both fear and power. Each country entered the war with its own understanding of air strategy. Britain relied on a defensive shield of fighters to protect its island. Germany built a doctrine of total air domination to support fast ground invasions. The Soviet Union desperately modernized its air force after the painful lessons of 1941, and the United States focused on long-range bombers, capable of reaching any target on the planet. These different approaches collided in the skies over Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. Technology advanced at an unbelievable speed. Engines became stronger, wings more aerodynamic, and weapons more deadly. Designers experimented with armor, radar, rockets, and even early jet propulsion. Pilots had to adapt just as fast, learning to fight at extreme altitudes and speeds that human bodies could barely handle. Training programs were shortened, and thousands of young men were sent into the air with only a few hours of flight experience. By 1942, it was already clear. Whoever controlled the sky would control the war. Factories, oil fields, and supply routes all depended on air protection. A single squadron could stop an entire army or save a city from destruction. The age of classic wars had ended, and the era of total air warfare had begun. The heart of this new warfare was the fighter aircraft FAST. Agile machines built for one purpose: to hunt the enemy in the sky. Every major power created its own legends of aviation, each one carrying the character of the nation that produced it. The British Spitfire became a symbol of resistance, elegant and deadly. Defending London during the darkest days of the Battle of Britain, German pilots trusted the Messerschmitt Bf-109, a ruthless predator that dominated European skies in the early years of the war. In the east, Soviet Yak and La fighters fought desperately to stop the Luftwaffe, often with simpler technology but unstoppable determination. Air combat was unlike anything humanity had ever known. Dogfights lasted only seconds, but those seconds decided life or death. Pilots had to think faster than their machines, predicting the enemy's move while enduring crushing G-forces. One small mistake meant flames, spinning metal, and a fall from thousands of meters. Many aces later admitted that luck played as big a role as skill. Yet newspapers turned the best of them into living heroes, names that inspired millions on the ground. As the war progressed, fighters became more than just hunters of other planes. They escorted bombers across oceans, attacked tanks and ships, and even carried early rockets and guided weapons. The American P-51 Mustang changed the balance in the West, giving Allied bombers a long-range guardian all the way to Berlin and back. German engineers answered with heavier cannons and experimental jets, trying to regain their lost advantage. The sky turned into a gigantic laboratory of death, where innovation was paid for with blood. Different fronts demanded different machines. Over the Pacific, where distances were endless, range was more important than speed. Carrier fighters like the Japanese Zero rewrote the rules of naval warfare. Above the frozen fields of Russia, planes had to survive snow, mud, and primitive airfields. In North Africa, engines choked on sand while pilots fought under a merciless sun. The global nature of the conflict forced aviation to adapt to every possible condition on Earth. By 1945, fighter aircraft had reached a level of perfection unimaginable only a decade earlier. They were flying faster than 700 kilometers per hour, armed with devastating cannons and guided by radar. But behind this technical brilliance stood human stories: young men, barely 20 years old, who climbed into narrow cockpits, knowing that each mission might be their last. The fighters ruled the clouds, but the price of that rule was measured in thousands of empty chairs at family tables. If fighters were the swords of the sky, bombers became its hammers. World War II introduced a terrifying idea. Victory could be achieved not only by defeating armies, but by crushing the enemy's industry and spirit from the air. Massive metal giants loaded with tons of explosives crossed borders at night, aiming at factories, railroads, ports, and entire cities. The war left the battlefield and entered the homes of ordinary people. Germany was the first to demonstrate the power of aerial terror. Warsaw, Rotterdam, and later London felt what it meant when the sky itself turned into an enemy. Sirens howled, searchlights cut through the darkness, and bombs fell without mercy. The British answered with their own night raids over the Ruhr, believing that destroying German industry would break Hitler's war machine. Soon, the United States joined with daylight precision bombing, sending endless formations of B-17 and B-24 aircraft deep into Europe. These missions were among the most dangerous of the entire war. Bomber crews flew for hours through freezing temperatures, wearing oxygen masks and heavy suits, knowing that enemy fighters and anti-aircraft guns waited ahead. Losses were horrific. Some squadrons were wiped out in a single mission, yet the strategy continued, because leaders on both sides believed there was no other path to victory. The Pacific, the logic of air war became even more brutal. American B-29 superfortresses turned Japanese cities into seas of fire, using new incendiary bombs designed to burn wooden neighborhoods. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, names that became symbols of total destruction. For the first time in history, a single aircraft could carry enough power to change the fate of a nation. The line between a military target and civilian life almost disappeared. Technology pushed bombers to incredible limits. Engineers created pressurized cabins, remote-controlled turrets, and primitive navigation computers. Radar allowed attacks through clouds and at night. But no invention could remove the moral weight carried by those who pressed the release button. Many pilots later confessed that the silence after the bombs fell was heavier than any explosion. By the end of the war, the bomber had become the ultimate instrument of strategic power. It proved that modern conflicts would no longer be decided only by soldiers on the ground. Entire societies were now part of the battlefield, and the sky had turned into a road leading straight to the heart of every nation. By the final years of World War II, the sky no longer resembled the one pilots had known in 1939. Propeller machines that once seemed unstoppable were suddenly challenged by the first jet aircraft. Germany introduced the Me-262, a fighter so fast that Allied pilots could barely react to it. Britain tested the Meteor, and the United States rushed to develop its own jet programs. A new era was beginning right in the middle of the war's final explosions. Radar networks, airborne computers, guided rockets, and pressurized cabins. All these innovations were born from the desperate race for superiority. What had started as experiments in small design offices turned into technologies that would define the second half of the 20th century. The Cold War, supersonic aviation, and even space exploration grew directly from the experience gained in those burning skies. Yet behind the machines remained the people. More than 2 million pilots and crew members from dozens of countries fought above every continent. Many of them were barely adults. They wrote letters before missions, drew lucky symbols on their planes, argued about engines and girlfriends, and tried not to think about the friends who did not return. For them, the war wasn't a chapter in a textbook, it was noise, fear, and the smell of fuel on cold morning airfields. The aircraft of that era became legends not just because of their technical qualities, but because of what they represented. The Spitfire stood for defiance, the Mustang for industrial power, the Il-2 for sacrifice, and the Zero for the dramatic rise and fall of an empire. Museums today keep these machines like sacred relics, their scratched metal still carrying traces of bullets and hurried repairs. World War II proved that control of the sky means control of history. Every modern air force, every airport, and every concept of air defense is rooted in the lessons learned between 1939 and 1945. The war ended, and cities were rebuilt, but the relationship between humanity and the sky changed forever. Aircraft became not only weapons, but instruments of global connection. The same technology that destroyed continents later connected them. The story of those planes is therefore more than a tale of battles. It is a story about how human genius can create miracles and horrors at the same time. The sky on fire eventually became the sky of peace, but its echo still reminds us what price was paid for the modern world and why those roaring engines must never be forgotten. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more.